Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of Melton Borough Council. I'll just go through the normal preliminaries. Members are reminded we'll be using the audio-visual system this evening, and the meeting will also be streamed live on YouTube. Members are asked to physically raise their hands in the usual way to indicate they wish to speak. Please switch mobile phones to silent. Should you need to leave the room during the meeting, unless it's an emergency evacuation, an emergency exit should be used, please use the marked exit and entrance. Evacuation procedure: in the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, please leave by the emergency exit. Please assemble at the far side of the front car park nearest to the park entrance. Officers will be on hand to assist persons who require any assistance. Public recording of the meeting. There is legislation that allows the public to film, record or use social media at a council meeting. This must not be disruptive to the good order of the meeting, nor include any filming or recording of the public seating area. Okay, move on to the agenda. First item is apologies for absence. I believe we've got an apology from Councillor Elaine Holmes, but we haven't received any others. I'm just doing a quick count. I think that's everybody else is here, I think. Next item, minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of December 2005. Before moving to confirm the minutes, are there any issues that members need to raise regarding the accuracy or otherwise? No? Could I have a proposer then to approve the minutes? Councillor Sharp, and the seconder, Councillor Gordon. And Councillor Thwaite, sorry, you're in my peripheral vision. Can we just have a show of hands to approve the minutes, please? Thank you, they are approved. The next item on the agenda is the response tracker. Give me while I get to that bit on the papers. There was one item on the response tracker relating to a matter raised by Councillor Gordon, I believe. Are you satisfied with the response that's set out there, Councillor Gordon?
Yes, I'm satisfied with the answer, but can you also include the bush shelter on Valley Road? I don't know if there's anybody else wants to add to that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I think Councillor Gordon brought it up right before Christmas. I personally brought it up the last few years on and off. We've been in touch with the county councillors for the town area. They've, as per the response, it's coming. But one thing concerns me is that they're going to get installed eventually without any council intervention, as in terms of how it's going to look and design. It's got to look good, and not these awful turquoise ones we've got now. So could we plan an actual meeting when it comes to this stage that we could see the sort of types of sort of like sort of bush shelters that we can have? I've said the ones on like Windsor Street, one on Windsor Street needs to be one that's long one, because the amount of people at 5:30 in the evening going home, for example, is very busy. Everyone's clumped in when it's pouring with rain like tonight. Everyone's clumped in one shelter, or there's actually about 3 or 4 up there actually, but they're all clumped. It's got to be one, quite a big one. So that'd be good if that could be factored in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, the item was just about explaining the funding, but I'm sure that could be taken away to the appropriate quarter. I'm looking at Lydia Ruslin. I'm sure it will be taken note of and followed up. Okay, the next item on the agenda is declarations of interest, and as per normal, I invite any members who feel the need to declare an interest in the items on tonight's agenda. Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I'm a council flat tenant, and also my sister owns a house that she rents out.
Thank you for that. I mean, I don't feel that requires you to leave the meeting at any point, unless that's your preference.
Yeah. If it comes down to the rent, or if I feel a bit uneasy on anything else, then I will go out. But the rent especially. Thank you.
Councillor Thwaites.
I just wanted a quick clarification on that point, in the fact that that may be a pecuniary interest, but I understand your view is that it's because this is a non-decision making meeting, that it's not. So I would like clarification on that for future meetings where we're talking about other non-registrable interests, where previously been excluded from a meeting, that if on the same basis for a pecuniary interest, you can be included within the meeting. For another non-registrable interest, I would also like the same treatment. So that's for future meetings. Thanks.
I mean, I know that comment, Councillor Thwaites, and I think you'll know that I was pretty much in agreement with the views you've expressed previously, but we have had guidance with the monitoring officer on that. So that was a particular set of circumstances. But yeah, your point is well made, and clearly we need to be looking at that again. Thank you.
Chair, if I could advise on that, whether or not this is a decision-making meeting is not the relevant test regarding whether a pecuniary interest exists in a matter being considered. The committee is looking at this matter tonight. It includes rents. It will make observations generally on this budget to Cabinet, and therefore the fact that those recommendations could include the rent means that a matter is being considered in which Councillor Gordon has pecuniary interest. So those rules do apply. So that would prevent her from consideration of that agenda item.
I just probed that one a bit further. I mean, thank you for that. That's very helpful. I mean, as you rightly said, we're not making a decision, but we are making recommendations that could influence the decision that's taken in due course by Cabinet and indeed full council. I'd be very reluctant, though, to exclude a member on a blanket basis looking at the budget issue. Are we on safe ground is if we actually get into a specific discussion around the issue of rents, then the issue of leaving the meeting would arise, but otherwise we can continue.
Yes, it comes if you are considering that matter, and obviously that we don't know where the meeting's going. If that matter's being considered, then that is an interest, and therefore the statutory exceptions apply.
Thank you for that. So if we get into, because there are 190 pages in the papers, we may not specifically talk about every item that's in there, but if we actually get into that territory, then Councillor Gordon will return to that. Yeah. Thank you. Were there any other declarations? Thank you. Move on to item 5, which again is a standard item on the agenda, which is review of the forward plan. Do any members wish to make any comments about the forward plan? Councillor Lumley.
Thanks, Chair. Should the car parking payment machines be on there? Because I mean, I've been talking about this for now quite a few years with the council leader from when he was elected in 2023, spring 2023. But I don't get any updates at all of what's going on. And we're now come to the end of this term next year, and there's still no progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm very reluctant to get into the mired territory of parking machines, but I'm certainly aware, and I can't absolutely say where I read it recently, but there was an update about the process that's currently underway, with the end aim being to procure new machines. I don't know if Lydia is able to just to update us on that.
I've got an update coming to Cabinet briefing on Wednesday. The process off the top of my head, I don't know the dates, but there's been, following the advice from procurement, there's been some soft market testing, and the results of that, those recommendations will be coming forward to Cabinet, but I will check the forward plan as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other comments on the forward plan? Councillor Lumley.
Just on that last point, thank you for that. So I just quickly, our group has been asking whether they should accept cash. I was told by the director before Lydia they would be accepting cash, but our group seem to be confused with they are or not. So can that be in the briefing for cabinet next week and then thereafter? Yeah, thank you.
No more comments on the forward plan. I'll move on to item 6, which is the review of the scrutiny work programme. And you will recall that we did make some changes to that programme, and it's been updated now to reflect that for the remainder of this year. And I think if you've looked at the forward plan, I'm sure you all have before coming here tonight, there are a number of outstanding items that are inevitably going to slip into next year and will clearly form part of our priority when we do our work programme in May. But are there any comments that the members wish to make? Thank you. Right, we're now going to move into the meat of the meeting, which of course is primarily to receive reports and have the opportunity to comment on the papers that have been circulated relating to the budget. There are 3 budget papers in front of us. Now, I'm not sure what order it's going to go in, but essentially, the Chief Executive and members of the SLT will provide a presentation on the 3 budget papers. Just to remind you, the reports are draft cabinet reports. So, in the wording in some of them, is a bit confusing in that respect because it talks about obviously what's going. The wording is appropriate to go into cabinet, but this is our opportunity to comment on them in advance of the cabinet meeting itself. The report's going to be presented to cabinet on the 4th of February, and then will be presented to council for approval on the 12th of February. Now, of course, what's in front of us tonight may change, because it's been emphasised that these are draft reports, and in some areas there's still information to come. I think the parish precepts springs to mind as one of those. Now, the way, just in terms of the structure of the meeting, we'll receive the presentations first, and the officers have indicated they're very happy during the course of the presentation, if you want to ask questions for clarification of anything that's being raised, then they're happy to take questions as they go along, but discussion will follow. So I'm just giving you advance warning, members, that if your question is leading into a discussion, then I shall probably ask you to hold that until we come back. So we'll receive the presentations on all 3 papers, and then what we will do is return to each one in turn, where so there'll be every opportunity for members to get into the detail on what's been said or what's in the papers, or a combination of both, or what's not in the papers, if that be the case, once we've had all the presentations. So if you do have questions as we go along because something's not clear to you, clarification only, please. Okay, on that note, I'll pass over to the officers for the presentations.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Just wait for Adam to get the presentation up, which he has. So thank you very much, Adam. I'm just check that the clicker is working. It is. So thank you. So yeah, good evening. So today we'll just provide a presentation on some of the key headlines and details from the reports that are before you this evening. I will kick off and give a bit of context around some of the things that we're grappling with at the moment, many of which I'm sure will be familiar to the committee. Dawn will then pick up the details in the budget itself and some of the specific financial information. Michelle will cover a little bit around the housing areas, but we've got a number of colleagues here tonight who are very happy to take any questions and support the debate and discussion once the presentation is concluded. So in terms of the things that we ultimately have to consider as a council when we set our budget, there's a balance of things really. Firstly, we have to reflect on the priorities that you ultimately wish us to pursue, and they are articulated in the approved corporate strategy, and we obviously work through those on an ongoing basis. But alongside those aspirations, we also have legal duties, so we have to maintain a whole raft of statutory responsibilities, both in terms of service delivery, but also in terms of legal and financial prudence and value for money. Add to that, we have demand pressures that change all the time, and particularly areas like homelessness, for example, across the country, they are increasing, and therefore they increase the pressure on our services and the cost of running those services. Particularly this year, I would say as well, we have the impacts from government policy, whether that's the finance settlements, the local government reorganisation discussions that we've obviously been having over the last year, but also as well the culmination of food waste collection services again, which I will speak to in more detail in a moment. So a whole raft of things that we have to hold sometimes in tension to make sure that we can set a balanced budget and deliver what you want us to do and what we need to do for our communities. In terms of some of those big items that I've just touched upon regarding the national context, you will have hopefully seen some of the updates that we provided in the last week or so in relation to the impacts of the finance settlement. Dawn will speak much more to the details financially in terms of the numbers around what that means for the council, but there are a number of things that appear to be coming together which are particularly impacting on Melton, and these are where they have changed the funding formula to reflect a different way of distributing what's often a kind of an insufficient amount of funding for the whole sector, but we have been impacted by the way in which they are choosing to redistribute that, particularly around things like deprivation, where funding has been moved towards areas of greater deprivation. And I make no comment on the policy itself other than the fact that it's been taken from places like ours that have greater rurality and remoteness, as it's described in the formula, has less of a weighting on the way in which funding is distributed, and that is negatively impacting councils like ourselves. There's also, again, perhaps the understandable desire to put more money into social care, which is the part of local government which is under the most pressure, but that again means money is being taken from districts like ourselves and passed to social care authorities. The other aspect which particularly is impacting on us as well is the way in which business rates have been protected. So up to now we've operated within a business rates pool, which has helpfully for Melton redistributed the quantum of retained business rates in Leicestershire across all the various districts and councils, and we have been a beneficiary of that redistribution. They have changed the way they're doing it now. The pool is going, and essentially they are baking in some of the gains that those authorities that have been the greatest beneficiaries historically, they are kind of reapplying those gains back to them. So some districts who've had particularly high growth over a number of years are having real windfalls as part of the settlement. We are not. We are increasing our growth, and members who've been around for some time will know this council has invested a lot of resource and effort in positioning itself for growth through our local plan and through seeking significant infrastructure. And we are seeing more homes built in Melton than at any point in the last 30 years. But essentially the financial rewards that come from that, and then potentially the jobs that arise from that as well, we are not getting the financial recompense that others have perhaps benefited from in the previous decade. So that is frustrating, and it is hitting our finances as a consequence. And the bottom line for all that is we were assured and advised that we would receive what's called new burdens funding for food waste collections in the settlement. However, that has now been rolled up into the quantum of the whole finance settlement. It is unclear what new burdens we have been provided for food waste. And the bottom line is, and Dawn will describe this in more detail when she does her presentation, the actual money we are receiving from government next year is less than the money we're receiving this year. And therefore, essentially, there is no additional funding for food waste. And yet that service will cost about £800,000 a year. It's about 10%, give or take, of our whole general fund budget. So it's a significant impact, which is why it's causing us some concern. The other thing to add to that, of course, is local government reorganisation, and that is a transition and change process that needs to be fully funded by the area that's going through that change. Apart from some very modest support funding we've had from government to support the development of our bids, we've had no additional funding so far. Places that have gone through it elsewhere have not had any funding either. We understand it will cost between 20 and 30 million in total to transition to whatever shape of local government comes forward in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and we will have to play our part in supporting that. You will see from the papers that at the moment we've allocated 250,000 from our reserves to support pressures around that project and programme over the course of 26-27. I would expect there to be another call on funding from NBC in the subsequent year as well. And so you can see that's an added pressure and burden on our reserves that is going to exacerbate some of the financial challenge created by the funding settlement. Add to that, we also have the challenge of maintaining our business as usual services alongside preparing for transition. When we've talked about this before, I've been clear that the impact on the organisation so far from the work we've done over the last year has been relatively modest. Predominantly, it's been myself and a number of other senior colleagues who've been involved heavily in developing proposals. That will change as we start to move into transition and we start to have to redesign and redevelop services for the new councils. That will require a much more organisational wide response, and therefore that will create additional burdens on our teams, and we will have to find a way to protect what we do now as well as prepare sensibly for transition. So that will require us to reflect on the priorities we've currently got in our corporate strategy and to look at reprioritising and refocusing those over the coming year. We've started that work and we'll start developing some thoughts about what that could look like. And my expectation is that at some point we will come back to council with some proposals and recommendations through cabinet around a refocused and perhaps leaner corporate strategy that is much sharper on what with the remaining time of this council, you would wish us to achieve on your behalf whilst we continue to work on LGR transition. And alongside that, of course, there's lots of uncertainty in the sector. And so one of the things we have to manage as well is trying to maintain the continuing integrity of this organisation. I think we've done that well so far collectively. I think the sense of the organisation is there's still a lot to protect and a lot to do. And we still have a sense of cohesion around Melton Borough Council. Again, as we move into the future and things start to become more clear about what the future direction of travel is for the council and the new unitaries, then it's incumbent on us to maintain that strength of organisation, because we and our communities are best served if we go into LGR in the strongest possible shape, and that's certainly something we'll continue to try to achieve over the coming years. So in terms of what that then means for us locally, I think we start and I've described some of the challenges already, whilst there are undoubted challenges, we do come from a position and a track record of good financial management and a prudent approach to our finances. And this was something that was clearly articulated just as recently as November when the external auditor's report went to the Audit and Standards Committee, and that was reassuring and pleasing to see that external assurance check. We also have, again, a good demonstration of prudence, seen our under-ring-fenced reserves increase. So in 2020, they were 2.4 million, 2023, 2.8, and we expect them by the end of this financial year to be at 4.2 million. So we have been able to increase our level of reserves, which therefore increase our level of protection from shocks. The challenge is, though, because of the finance settlement, because of the nature of those things coming together alongside local government reorganisation and food waste, it is putting us in a very, very challenging situation. Essentially, if we do all those things at the timetable that was originally envisaged, then this council would likely run out of reserves by 2028-29. Now, the impact of that will depend very much on when local government reorganisation takes place. And at this point, we don't have any certainty of that. We will get that, we expect, in July this year. So some of the risks we face may be designed out by choices that are made by government. But at this stage, we can't be complacent. And therefore, at this stage, we need to have multiple scenarios planned for, so that if we get to a point where things become more difficult, then we've got time and space to react accordingly. In terms of how we are responding locally to the current position, now, clearly financial challenges are nothing new. We have faced an acute finance situation for pretty much as long as I've been in local government for the last 20 years. We already have a well-established financial sustainability programme, and that's something that we review as managers and discuss with Cabinet on a regular basis. And I've just listed out there a number of ways in which we have over recent times sought to either increase our income or reduce our costs. We also have a number of corporate disciplines which are already in place, and we will continue to maintain through this period, things like proactive vacancy management, where we check every vacancy before it is re-recruited to. We consider whether it's necessary, and ultimately everyone needs a senior management sign-off. We look at how we have underspends in certain areas and see if we can redeploy them to others which are under pressure. So we use our finances judiciously across the organisation. People do not scurry little pots of money away for a rainy day. That's not how we operate at all. There's significant budget challenge before it becomes to you tonight from the Section 151 officer and directors and SLT more generally. So the budgets are scrutinised, tested, challenged to make sure that we get as much fat out the system as is possible, and obviously alongside that as well, of course, where we can, we try and secure external funding to assist us with the things that we're seeking to get done. What else we've done on top of those kind of normal business items, we have, you would have seen through the leader, written to the Secretary of State requesting or highlighting the frustrations that we have as a council about the impact of the finance settlement, which we think is disproportionately hitting Melton. And again, Dawn may speak to this, but the data indicates that we are one of the more worst affected from this settlement. And we are seeking a delay in the requirement to implement food waste, which will allow us to smooth some of these funding pressures over a longer period, and particularly then as you move into local government reorganisation, create the potential for us to benefit collectively more from economies of scale that can be generated if contracts are secured across a larger footprint. Myself and Dawn have already had a meeting with colleagues from MHCLG, and those discussions will continue. And we are, as a senior team, just starting to scenario plan, as I'd mentioned, the various impacts of when food waste might be implemented, whether it's a full or a partial food waste implementation, and then whether local government reorganisation takes place in April 28 or April 29. All of those things will affect our forecasting in terms of the finances of the council, and therefore we are looking at what that means and considering what response might be required. We don't have to react. We certainly overreact. We certainly don't have to panic, because as Dawn will describe, the settlement for this coming year, 26-27, gives us some breathing space. And I think we are in a position where we can await the outcome from local government reorganisation, the decision that government takes, and then we can take stock at that point. What we will do in the meantime is prepare and be ready should we need to respond. And obviously we'll keep all members appraised of that as we go forward, and we'll bring forward proposals and any recommended changes necessary, as I suggested, likely as part of that corporate strategy refocus. We are also making active representations into the wider sector as well, so through the district councils network and the LGA, and we'll continue to make Melton's case on that national stage as well, and that work will continue over the coming months. So at that point, Chair, I shall hand over to Dawn to pick up the detail. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I'm going to start off with a provisional finance settlement, just because it gives the background as to where we are. It is provisional. The indication is that the final will be out week commencing the 9th of February, probably unhelpfully the week of Cabinet. So whether we get it in time to analyse it, ready for that Cabinet meeting, remains to be seen. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some changes, but it's unlikely they'll be of anywhere near the magnitude that we need to solve our financial issues. Probably more tweaks at the end. So this was a 3-year settlement issued for the next 3 years. That's the first time in quite a long time that we've seen a 3-year settlement. What that actually means is it in terms of our MTFS, even though it's a really poor settlement for us, it gives you that certainty so that when we do the sensitivity analysis of what the estimates may be upwards or downwards, it narrows that margin between what we expect and what could be an optimistic or pessimistic assumption. So what you're really only seeing is variations around inflation assumptions and demand assumptions, not those wide swings before that we saw with, well, will we get new homes bonus? Will it continue? That sort of thing. I won't cover all the things that Ed's already covered, but one of the other biggest changes is there was a reset to the business rate system. This is a really complicated system that's been in place since 2013, with layers of complexity added over the years on top of that. In some ways, it has somewhat been simplified in terms of the accounting. But the way that it worked was they set a baseline for every authority, and if you gained business rates in excess of that baseline, you got to keep a portion of that, and you paid a levy over to the government on the other portion. And that we were an authority with modest growth, but still growth. So that meant that we were achieving a retention of that growth over that baseline, and we've been doing so for the last 13 years. We were also in a pool with the rest of Leicestershire, Leicester and County. I won't go into why that works so well, but counties and cities generally were the other way round, and they didn't pay a levy. And what that meant was, instead of collectively us paying a levy over to the government, that was retained within Leicestershire. A couple of agreements over that time as to how it was distributed, but in the last few years there's been upwards of 20 odd million retained within Leicestershire that would have been handed over to government, of which we retained a share of that in the early years in the form of grants that we could apply for, and in latter years a portion of that. So for all those authorities that were in a position like us, with growth above that baseline, we were getting to keep that. And what they've done is they've reset the whole system and issued new baselines for everyone. So in 26-27, the rates that you get to keep is unless there's some tweaks around the edges, is likely to be exactly in line with that baseline. So we're all starting again, and to get any growth, we've got to grow above this new baseline. What that means is that the business rates pool is now no longer viable, carries a heavy risk with that, because we're starting at that bottom line. So the decision has been made to, across Leicestershire, unanimous, to discontinue that business rates pool. So we're losing those bonuses as well that we previously got from being in the pool. And we can revisit that decision again in 27-28 when we understand a lot more about the system, and when we start to understand whether councils within Leicestershire are starting to get growth again, and whether that is worth the risk of rejoining up, subject to the government saying that they will accept new pools. I am not aware of any pool that's continuing across the country because of this reason. You've probably seen there's been a lot in the press as well. There's also a revaluation of business rates from the 1st of April 2026, also changes in the multipliers, and also changes to the various reliefs and discounts, particularly around retail, hospitality and leisure, and pubs are one of the things that there's been a lot in around the press. What that effectively means is an awful lot of complexity around what businesses will pay, and our billing around that as well. We are waiting for software updates, etc. And that's why in your papers, those figures around some of those business rates are still tentative, and we'll wait and see. And it could change again in the settlement as well. I think Ed's probably covered around the grants rolled in. So there's also, for those authorities that are the hardest hit, different layers of transitional relief. As Ed says, we're one of the hardest hit in the country. There was circa 60 odd authorities, and I say circa because the number kept changing on every call I was in, but I think it's around 67 now. 67 councils across the country are the hardest hit from this settlement, of which we are one. And because we are in that category of being hardest hit, we are being protected at 95% of our adjusted 25-26 grant funding level. So what that effectively means is we will be in that transitional relief period for the period of the 3 years of the settlement. And we will be getting a flat amount of grant, which I'll show you on the next slide, equivalent to 95% of 25-26, so a 5% cut. So it's a 5% cut for the 3 years. That's no real term increase, and that means we've got to fund that food waste service as a new burden from that settlement, which is a 5% reduction. So that's why the reason primarily that we are in this situation, and you'll see it quite well on the next slide. So regardless of the fact that the government may have put money into the quantum that has been distributed for food waste, there's no transparency as to how that's been distributed because it's on this complex formula. But if you are in a protection, then you're not getting any increase to reflect that. And if you just see on the next slide, so the way that the government assesses your transitional relief, it uses core spending power, and that is what they define as the resources that are available to a council to deliver services. So you'll see in there that our adjusted 25-26 number, the starting point, the base, is a core spending power of 9.5 million. And then we are protected at that 9.2 level across those 3 years. So no more resources in terms of no increase to our core spending power for the next 3 years. But that's not all the story. It's actually worse than that, because core spending power includes council tax, what they assume you can raise locally. So if you look on there between 25-26 and 26-27, if we maximise council tax, which is the proposal, 2.99% for a district council, you get another 200,000 to spend from your council tax, regardless of how your base changes. So your transitional relief goes down accordingly. So your council tax goes up, your government grant goes down to keep your spending power at 9.2. So effectively, you're having to fund inflationary and real-term increases from what is really no increase whatsoever over that 3 years, if it makes sense. So you can see in there 200,000 each year, and then 300,000 in 28-29, but your core spending power stays the same, so therefore your external funding goes down. Okay, and it's even worse than that, because that council tax includes what goes on special expenses as well. So that's not actually available to deliver general fund services across the borough. So moving on to the proposed budget for 26-27, your capping levels is the higher of 3% or £5 for a district council, and for Melton 3% generates the most council tax. But that capping level is includes all of your funds, so the rural special expenses for cemeteries, closed churchyards, and also special expenses Melton Mowbray. So by applying a council tax increase of 2.99% on special, and a level that breaks even on the parish specials, results in a 2.74% council tax increase on general expenses. That results in, for 26-27, and this plays to what Ed said about actually, 26-27 is sort of okay. That results in a surplus of just over 400,000. There are growth proposals for essential and high priority items, which I'll come on to in a moment, of just over 500,000, leaving you with a deficit of 68,000, which you would have to draw on from your reserves. So the papers, I think it's Appendix A, include more detail around the growth bids, but they're broken down there between 396 of non-recurring items. So obviously they're only funded in 26-27, which does create you a bit more headroom in 27-28, and then 110 of recurring growth bids. We've got funding proposed for a homeless restructure, which is already in place. So this is formalising what is already what is currently a temporary position. There is an essential upgrade to meet the needs of the planning and productivity plan on our IDOCS planning system. And then there's some non-recurring items around property for surveys, and stockyard, which has already been approved by Cabinet, and also some temporary work and surveys to Asferby Road embankment, and then another years of funding for farmers' health checks, which we are already trying to source some external funding for. And as Ed said, also in the proposals, there's a proposal to draw 250,000 on the reserves for the local government reorganisation transition costs in 26-27. And then on special expenses, Melton Mowbray, based on a 2.99% council tax increase, that results in a really modest surplus of just over £3,000. There's non-recurring growth proposals of just under 30,000, which would result in a 25,000 deficit, which would have to come from the special expenses reserve. And there's the two growth bids in respect of special expenses, Melton Mowbray, linked to planned maintenance at various sites and also some condition surveys related to special expenses. Okay, so probably covered a little.
Sorry, could I ask you a quick question just for clarification? In the previous slide, the iDocs upgrade was in the recurring and the non-recurring.
Yeah, that's because there's a cost of implementation, and then there are ongoing costs of the actual software itself. Okay, and this sort of gives the background really to what I was saying around the proposed overall increase is 2.99 to be below the 3% capping limit, and you can see that at the bottom when we take the average, and then you can see the breakdown there with the 2.74 on general, special expenses Melton Mowbray at 2.99, and then the three rural parish areas being the Sproston, Frisbee and Gadsby. And we have covered the Frisbee quite extensively. There was the major piece of work to the wall at Frisbee, which members agreed we would recover over a 3-year period. There is a risk with that one, which I've highlighted in the report, that further works could be required there. So I don't think we've necessarily seen the end of that expenditure in that area. And then future years projections for general expenses there. So you can see the ever increasing position. So as I said, because you've got a surplus of just over 400,000 in 26-27, and some of those growth items, a large proportion of them are non-recurring. When you get to 27-28, again, you've got a forecast deficit of just over 200,000 there, but then that increases then to just over £1 million in 28-29 and over 2 million in 29-30. 29-30 is the one where it's really difficult because that would be the end of your 3-year settlement there. There's still the risk as well in 28-29 that there'll be a spending review and they could revisit that 3-year finance settlement in that year. And you can just see there the increases, modest increase really in your net expenditure, with investment income starting to decline as your balance is reduced, and also interest rates start to reduce as well. Just inflationary increases to business rates, and that reducing revenue support grant coming from your core spending power, and then your council tax increases there at around 200,000 per annum. The point to make here is that there is no allowance in the budget and in those forecasts for a food waste collection service. So any food waste collection service would increase those deficits. So it does not provide any provision for a food waste service. And then on special expenses, you've got fairly modest growth in expenditure. Again, a similar sort of modest decline in investment income and the increase in council tax, which gives a slow increase in the surplus on that fund. And you will see in the papers as well that, subject to affordability, either at the year end or in the future, I'm recommending that the working balance on that account is increased to 100,000. It currently sits at 50. 50,000, that a working balance is the minimum level below which you should not allow your reserves to go. And we've seen a lot of variation in the past on special expenses, Melton Mowbray. Primarily something like cemetery income can make a big difference to your bottom line at the year end. And that working balance of 50,000 has been at that level, I can't even remember, I'm thinking over 20 years, and I think it's getting increasingly too low. So my recommendation to you would be, if there's an underspend at the year end, we top it up, and as those small surpluses start to grow, should that materialise, we can use that to top that fund up. And then, as I said, there's the scenario planning. So we do some sensitivity analysis around the various figures. What if inflation is 0.5% or more or less than we'd assumed? What if demand changes for some of these areas? And I think if you compared this to the sort of numbers I was showing you in previous years, you can see how much narrower that gap's now got. So in 27-28, you know, between your best and worst case scenario, to only have 500,000 difference. So it's getting a lot more narrow because of that certainty around the settlement. And then obviously you see that really increase in 29-30 when we reach the end of that 3-year settlement. Just pulled out a complete snapshot. The risk list in your report gets longer and longer every year. That's the same for a lot of councils. We get a lot more risk averse in terms of making sure that members, the public, are aware of some of those risks. And I've just pulled out some of the key ones there around for your attention, really. I think Ed's already covered the one around LGA. LGA, it should be LGR transition, because LGA on the brain, local government reorganisation transition costs, 250,000 in the context of a 20-odd million total cost of transition is just a drop in the ocean, really. And then you've got the other key one around, never mind food waste. The end of the current contract is in 2028 as well, and we've got no idea what the impact of that could be. And then there's some other areas like the stockyard. We've not incorporated that yet because we've those are still speculative in terms of the estimates. So a whole load of risks on there as well. And the big one at the bottom, as I say, that food waste revenue, service delivery costs have not been included. So just a flavour, really, I'd referred to all of the work that we do around financial sustainability and savings. Just to reiterate, the amount of scrutiny that officers put into those budgets every year is really reflective of how tight they are. It is incredibly tight. There is no slack in there. When we do find savings, it's because we've got a vacancy or something has not been able to be delivered or something unexpected, and there's always something else popping up that we need to use our budget flexibility around to move over to meet a demand somewhere else. We have no general contingency budgets at all within there. I know some councils will carry a contingency budget. We do not have anything like that at all. So anything that cannot be met in year from savings elsewhere has to be a draw on the reserves, either within delegation or back to cabinet or council ultimately. So just a flavour there around some of the things we're looking at. So we've got the longer term projects around the asset development programme and the stockyard. Replacement of car parking machines was mentioned earlier, and the revenue savings that's likely to generate, as well as a review of the customer journey. So moving on to capital proposals then, again reflective of the fact that your capital receipts are almost exhausted. We've got a very modest programme. We've got some repairs and renewals reserves for things like vehicles and also particularly IT, which we were able to build up in the past. So we've got expenditure on IT in there that can be met from that reserve. We've got the food waste vehicles, which has had to be deferred from 24 25-26 as a result of delivery issues. We've got these reprofiling of the stockyards, so there'll be the second or third year of that delivery. And the only real new scheme of note is the Lake Terrace surface water drainage at 260,000. And in order to fund that, in the report, you will see the proposal is that we remove the LED street lighting project that's not been able to progress. And then you've got your disabled facility grants as normal, which is fully externally funded. And we've got one scheme next year proposed for Doctors Lane allotments, fencing, and that can be funded from the special expenses capital receipts. So taking into account your revenue proposals in front of you and the capital proposals, these are your estimated reserves and balances at the end of 26-27. So as I said, you can see capital receipts, unless we sell some more assets, and there are one or two items in the pipeline, they're almost exhausted. As Ed said, your corporate priorities reserve has been boosted quite significantly in prior years with the bonuses from the business rates pool. So that would stand just at over 3 million. You've got your working balance on the general fund and the special expenses. It's 1 million is your minimum level on the general fund. So if you started to use that, that's a little bit of a yellow card, and you should be topping that back up because that's your minimum level. And you've got a small amount left on what was an innovation fund, the Regen and Innovation Reserve. And special expenses has got a small reserve over the working balance, which is now down to 69, taking into account the growth proposals. So those balances assume that all those growth proposals are funded and the reserve is used to balance the deficit. And it also takes into account that we will receive one remaining year of pooling money, that being the 25-26 year that we'll receive next year. So we talk about the affordability of food waste and local government reorganisation. And here I've just done some forecasts around what that would mean. So your key unallocated reserve is the corporate priorities reserve on the general expenses. So taking that balance at the end of March 27, so at the end of the proposed budget, taking into account those forecast deficits, already the planned use of reserves around things like elections, should they go ahead, and stockyard, which was already pre-approved by Cabinet. You can see in there what those balances would go down to even without food waste. You're already entering into a deficit in 29-30. You take a full rollout of food waste across the borough, and also providing for the replacement of those vehicles in line with the policy, because otherwise, once those vehicles have reached the end of their life, you would have to borrow for those or take out expensive leasing. You can see that your money would run out, as Ed said, between 2028-29. And that doesn't take into account, there's been talk about a community governance review that could cost upwards of 200,000. It doesn't take into account any more money set aside for, there's that rogue LGA again, obviously had that on the brain. So local government reorganisation transition costs, and those are not factored in. And also if we implement food waste during 26-27, that would be a further draw on the reserve before we get to 27-28. So I think that highlights just how perilous the position is when you factor in the need to roll out food waste across the borough. So I'm going to move on to the HRA now, and I think, Michelle, you were going to kick off.
I'll let you do the slides, Dawn, when it's time to change. So as you'll know, the HRA is a separate ring-fenced account, so this is separate to the general fund, and we manage that in a way that the tenant income and income directly supporting the HRA is how we then fund projects, programmes and investment in tenants' homes. As you'll know, we have a 30-year business plan for the HRA. We deliver against that business plan, and I'm pleased to say that the HRA does remain in a financially sustainable position, albeit it is incredibly tight and has been since the inception of the business plan. And I just wanted to talk you through some of the particular pressures that we've had, which have resulted in a significant overspend for which we would have liked to have avoided, but sits somewhere between 900,000 and £1 million over the year. That is something that is manageable, has been managed through the year, and we've been actively mitigating, but we wanted to be really transparent with you as a committee this evening. So you'll see that this has been reported since Q2. It's been reported openly and transparently through budget reports, including what we're doing to address that. Some of the key pressures have included inflation affecting the sector and sector-wide costs. Design and pricing structure of the current repairs and voids contracts. So the model and the design of the current contract, as we've shared with you in previous committee meetings, is no longer meeting our requirements. So we work on something called a price per property, price per void type arrangement. And we're seeing increasingly pressures and requirements that are sitting outside of the things that sit within that contract. So we're seeing more exclusions, which have attracted higher costs. Alongside that, we have seen much higher demand. And just to give you an indication, particularly around our voids, so we projected around 150 void vacant properties for the year. And as we've sit in January, we've already had 153. So you can see the amount of demand there that we've had in addition to the complexity of the properties and the requirements to turn them around. We have taken some action to mitigate the impact of energy cost rises for tenants in one of our sheltered housing schemes. There have been some temporary staffing arrangements, and we did have an issue at the start of the year with a backlog of invoices from our primary contractor. Those things collectively have resulted in that overspend position. And in addition to that, the government has introduced AWAB's law, which we really welcome. And I know as a committee, you've discussed previously the positivity about an increased focus on health and safety. That has increased demand and also the cost for the service. I want to be really clear that this is not unique to Melton. This is a sector-wide position, and we're quite happy to share with you the analysis of what's happening within the wider sector, seeing these increased costs. And it's certainly putting some landlords into a much more difficult position than we are finding ourselves in, although it is tight and pressured. Things that we've been doing, we have had oversight all the way through, so there has been awareness and transparency, and we have taken decisive action, including a value for money review of our current repairs and voids contract, and a decision to cease that early in order to move into a different contract model. And that's some work that's underway at the moment. And we did that alongside looking at how the contract was delivering for tenants, so bringing that tenant element into it as well. As I say, the HRA does remain financially viable, but the headroom is tight, and the action that we're taking now and we'll need to take in the future, we'll need to make sure that we reduce the risk of overspend in the future. One of the key themes through the reprocurement of contract is to have greater cost certainty, so we don't have things sitting outside of the contract arrangements that are in place. So moving to the schedule of rates model that was set out will help us to do that. The other thing that we have an eye on, and you will see within our updated housing asset management plan, is the government are currently consulting on some of the changes, one to the decent home standard, and the other is around minimum energy efficiency standards. Both of those would have cost implications. We don't yet know what they will look like, and we will need to factor those into our future review and refresh of both the asset management plan and the business plans. So it's tight, it's pressured, we are managing that, and like with the general fund, we're not panicked, we are managing that. And we wanted to just give you an insight also, Dawn, if you can just go to the next slide, please, into some of the outcomes being achieved for housing, because what we don't want is to leave you with an impression that we've got a high level of spend and we're not delivering the things that we should be. We are. So we remain in a sector leading position around our stock condition knowledge and data and the level of granular data we should have. So 96% of homes currently surveyed, and that programme is ongoing and on track as we would expect it to be. Our decent homes figure sits at just over 96%, and we do remain on track to meet that across all of our homes by 2028. The caveat I add is that the standard may change, and we will need to plan around that. We have got an up-to-date housing asset management plan that delivers on the business plan that's in place, and we update that on an annual basis. So Cabinet approved the refresh plan last month. The account is viable. We continue to invest in the way that we would want to in tenants' homes. We're also doing everything we can to maximise income. So we've had a hugely improved position around rent arrears management and rent collection, and that is sustained. We have also done things through disposal of assets where appropriate, and achieving grant funding where appropriate as well. All of those things help us to invest in homes, to acquire new homes, and also to support the supply of temporary accommodations. So we've had some real positives in the year. As you'll know, we've secured our C2 grading, so a compliant grading from the regulator, and we've continued to make progress since then. So we've not taken any backwards steps in terms of that, and we enjoy a really constructive relationship with the regulator. And I wanted to just finish by focusing on health and safety. As you'll know, we never take our eye off health and safety in housing. It remains a key focus, and we continue to have a really strong grip on that. So we audit that every year. And again, our audit last year showed that we had substantial assurance for controls and compliance in that area. We're due to have our next audit in there, which will also pick up our introduction of AWAB's law, as you would expect. But audits are not limited to that. We've also had audits across plan maintenance, rent arrears, the housing and repairs and voids contracts. So we've got good coverage there, and we can be satisfied that we've had a good handle on the way in which we've been managing. I've talked already about the value for money review. That has been really instrumental in planning the way forward. So a big programme of work for the team at the moment, and we will continue our work around income maximisation. So just some context there, and obviously happy to take questions as we get to later in the session. But Dawn, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Okay, so back to the numbers then. So you can see there the proposed budget for 26-27 compared to where we estimate we're going to be at the year end. And you can see that we're forecasting at the end of 25-26 that we will be drawing on the reserves by 666,000, and the budget for next year is a contribution to the reserves of 225. And your members may recall from the business plan that we do have those fluctuations. In some years we draw and in others we add in, and that depends on where we are in the asset management plan and meeting decent home standard. And similar to the general fund, you've got a working balance for your reserves, which is your minimum reserve, and that's just set at £1 million. And the rent proposals for 26-27, so in line with government policy, that would be an increase of CPI plus 1%, which would be 4.8%, and that would result in an average social rent for the year of £101.59.
It's just part of the presentation at the moment. If you get to a point of considering this, then you'd have to leave. But yes.
It's okay. And the current policy is that any relets are at formula rent plus 5% tolerance. Just some information there. Around 370 tenants are claiming housing benefit. Obviously, we wouldn't know the numbers around universal credit, and many would pay direct. Key consideration, and the way that the report's written this year, is that we have heard, and there's a consultation around considering rent convergence, but we don't have the details around that, so the recommendations worded accordingly, and that would be for those properties that are below formula rent, so that it would bring them slowly back into line with formula rent. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it's like 70 or 80% odd of our tenants are below formula rent. And this is a significant move, generating more income to housing revenue accounts, and is much needed. So we're waiting for that information at the moment. And then just a list there of what your capital programme proposals look like for next year. In terms of setting the capital programme, it's all derived from the HRA business plan and the asset management plan and condition surveys. So it's quite a well evidence-backed and data-backed programme. And that's how it's funded there. You can see the different reserves that go to fund that programme as well. And there's taking into account those proposals, the contribution from the revenue and also the draw on that to fund the capital programme. You can see where those estimated balances are. So the reserves are reducing, and then in later years of the HRA business plan, we start to contribute more and more into those reserves, and then in later years they start to be drawn back on. I know Michelle's covered the overspend for this year. The key to that is that whilst we have that under control, we cannot afford to have many more years of that position, because that would leave the reserves so low that we would have to start looking at priorities, and that might mean that we can't deliver against some of the promises in the HRA business plan. So to sum up then, I think, it's fair to say the outcome of the fair funding review, the baseline reset, and also the requirements to deliver a food waste funding service has really affected our financial sustainability and the risks relating to that. The draft budget and the proposals in front of you are based on existing service levels, and anything that is not an existing service level is set out in the growth. As I say, makes no provision for a food waste collection service, and we will continue to lobby and press government, LGA for their support, and bodies like District Councils Network, etc. And we're doing the scenario planning as well to look at what some of the things that we could do to try and mitigate some of that. And then in terms of next steps, so we're here this evening to seek your views and input, which will feed back to the Cabinet when they meet. And we, as I said, will continue to make representation to the government regarding the settlement and the affordability of a food waste service. The Cabinet meets on the, I said the 4th of February. I'm starting to think it was actually it is the 4th, isn't it? Yeah, and then the council meets on the 12th, and then the council meeting sets the council tax on the 26th of February. So they're the key dates, that we've got in the calendar. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that very detailed presentation. Obviously, it's against a slightly gloomy background. I did go through the report trying to look for something positive and cheery, and the best I could come up with is that we've risen to 305th in the league table of local authorities. So instead of being the 4th smallest in the country, we're now the 5th smallest in the country. Being facetious aside, I mean, there's clearly within the body of this, there's a record of actually achieving a lot as a council. And I think when I was reading the papers, despite the difficulties that have been very well set out to us tonight, I was struck by the calm approach being taken to say, well, we want to continue achieving and delivering for our residents, and a lot of work has gone into putting these proposals together with that in mind. So on that note, I do have a few items to raise in due course, but I'll open it up to members of the committee. As I indicated earlier, we'll take the issues in turn. So, we'll take the issues in turn, which is the capital programme, the general fund revenue budget, and the revenue budget proposals for the housing revenue account. But I'm not going to be too hard and fast if people slip in between those. And I think there are some overarching issues that came out from the presentation anyway that don't slot into those. But for the purpose of recording it for the feedback, it will help if we're clear which area we're talking about. Councillor Pritchett.
the director a clarification question. The £250,000 at this stage for transition costs. And I note in the recommendations page to Cabinet, there may be more, and there may be during the time to 1st of April 2028. If under whatever arrangements it needs authorising, there's an authorisation of a town council. Does that £250,000 include the work for that, setting up a town council?
No, the 250,000 is a delegation to Cabinet, so the authority would be through Cabinet, and that would, my understanding is that does not include a community governance review or a creation of a town council, purely for the transition costs or preparing for local government reorganisation.
And I've got several questions, but I'll just do one at a time, saying that, yeah. For the got seldom where to start really. Just regarding the food waste collection, are we able to opt out of it? I don't think we are, but I'm going to ask anyway. I'm very concerned about it. As per my comments for the last 18 months in this committee, there's been recorded, non-recorded. I've been anti it the whole time. Excuse me. I'm concerned as well when it gets implemented. What I've read, we've got to have smaller black bins as well, which is going to be uproar across the whole borough. I can just see it now. Can I just ask that question? If we are able to opt out of it, can I ask the council leader if he will is in the audience? I can see him. If he will contact our MP to ask in the House of Commons whether this can be axed. That's my first question. Thank you.
I won't respond to the point about the leader speaking to the MP in relation to the policy itself. Just in terms of the legal position, so we aren't able to opt out. It's a mandatory requirement. In terms of action we've taken so far, so the earliest we could possibly implement it from a practical basis is the 1st of January 2027. So that's the earliest it could come in. But as Dawn has indicated, we haven't yet made provision because we are seeking a further deferral beyond that time to coincide with local government reorganisation. Our request to DEFRA will be, we've already spoken to MHCLG, we are going to be engaging with DEFRA separately, and our request will be to defer implementation essentially to the other side of LGR. So whilst I don't believe we'll be able to resist it in perpetuity, we may be able to postpone it, and that's what we're seeking, some pragmatism in the context of wanting to maintain the services this council provides and also make a positive and meaningful contribution to LGR, which we think is the bigger prize that government is wishing to deliver for local government, and that's what we're seeking to encourage them to accept on our behalf.
That's great. Thank you. I mean, one of those things, isn't it? It's just very worrying. Yeah.
Councillor Thwaites.
Sorry, it's just a supplementary question to that one, really, which is that if we were successful in deferring it to as late as until the LGR, obviously we've already made a commitment for the purchase of the vehicles and that sort of thing. So would there be a material impact? Because I assume we can't stop them now we've ordered them. So would it actually have a financial impact, a positive impact on us or not?
So one of the things we are working through is we obviously, we have an outstanding order for 5 vehicles, I think it, isn't it? And given that we are at this point saying we continue to wish to meet the requirements, what we're saying to government is we can't meet it in the timetable they've initially set out. So rather than saying we don't need the vehicles, what we are intending to do is to seek to postpone the delivery of those vehicles in line with whatever we can agree with DEFRA for a new timetable. So that's what we would seek to do. So the funding we've set aside would likely still be required, but the delivery date will be deferred. Because the challenge for the council is there is a statutory requirement to implement food waste collections, and therefore we are not advising it would be sensible to disregard that requirement. What we're saying is for practical reasons, for the reasons we've talked about so far, there is a justification for us to make the case that it should be deferred, and therefore that's what we propose to do with the vehicles and caddies and any other preparations that we are currently making, but that's still work in progress at this point.
Can I just ask, forgive me if I just, it's on that point, because I'm reminded from Councillor Lumley's comments that we also discussed as part of the wider issue of waste, the change of the bin size. Is that linked to the food waste collection, or was it a separate strand of thinking? And if so, is it going ahead regardless of the food waste issue?
So yeah, I can answer that. So if you recall, when the policy went through, we looked at an implementation timetable for the various strands of the policy, seeking to take a pragmatic view where possible. So logic would say that if you have an ability to dispose of food waste separately, then that makes that an easier decision in terms of a household needing a smaller bin. What we would do is look at that on a case-by-case basis, I think, and make provision for both. So it was never intended to be a big bang rollout of lots of smaller bins anyway. It was always going to be a very slow process, but we will just take a pragmatic view. We have some households that tell us they actually don't need the size of bin that they have now. So that's something we'll need to work through. In terms of the decision and agreement we come to with DEFRA, there will be a number of considerations and implications, but I'm content that the policy is sufficiently flexible to allow us to continue to have a pragmatic approach.
Forgive me, I've got Councillor Chubb and then Councillor Sharp, but just on that. So that being the case, if we push back the small bin acquisition programme, would that have any measurable impact financially?
Negligible, really, yeah.
Beard. Councillor Chubb.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much indeed for presentation, detailed presentation. I think, if my understanding, in summary, the budget obviously is extremely tight. You mentioned the prudence, and I note all of that in terms of running that, but there's no allowance for contingency at all. And the strategy, as I understand it, is obviously to rely on the reserves increasingly as you project over the coming years. I think, if I understand it from position that you've shown, really, particularly with the food wastage and other potential threats, as we know, with reduction in government spend, or so we'd say public spending, and also potentially geopolitics as well. Because of there's no contingency, there's no real flex. And the budget as it stands, as I understand it, it really is, for a size of Melton Borough Council, is no longer viable. So the local government review coming as it is now is probably quite timely, because really the council of this size really can't survive with all of those hits coming at every direction.
Yeah, I mean, the amount that they've reduced funding and the burdens that they've put on us without funding that just affects viability. So it's a whole, it's what we've suffered to date, and then this final settlement on top with the food waste has got us into this position, not through any fault of our own. We've done incredibly well, really, to manage some of those previous reductions and challenges that we've had over the years, because for a number of years, council tax increases has not covered inflationary increases, and yet we've managed to, through efficiencies, savings, smart working, etc., we have managed to cover those sort of losses. But this is just such a big loss in such a short period of time, and it's carrying on as well, with them now taking council tax into account.
Thank you.
Briefly add a bit of wider sectoral context as well around that. So Dawn spoke about the impact on our finances in 2029, 2030, when the transitional protections the government's put in place disappear. That creates a cliff edge for us. The challenge for us is that the cliff edge is closer than that because of some of the other factors we've already talked about. But the reality is, for most districts, they are all facing a cliff edge from 29, 30 when those protections go. And to some extent, the finance settlement has been built, and those protections are built on the assumption that local government reorganisation will happen, because if it doesn't, then the whole sector of city district councils will be unviable at that point. So either the government will have to revisit the settlement, I believe, at that point, if it hasn't delivered LGR, or LGR will supersede and will be a new environment in any case. But I think you're right that the nature of the way it's been set up now, it assumes certain things about the future of this and other similar organisations.
Councillor Sharp, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. With the food waste and with the buying the bin lorries, or whatever you want to call them, the food waste lorries, have the 800, is it 820,000 and then 112,000 for repairs and stuff like that? Are we doing that in house, or is that to be put out for tender? Has anyone done any calculations for another firm coming in for tendering the whole job? And have we done any calculations of what really is going to cost the actual borough?
If I can respond to that. So in terms of the vehicles themselves, so there were a number of conversations with government around what a food waste vehicle actually costs, and the cost of it is more than the allocation, the capital allocation that we received, which is why we've had to top up that particular allocation in order to purchase those vehicles, to get best value and to get a delivery slot that was allowing us to get as close to the implementation deadline as possible. We've worked directly with BIFA. In terms of the service itself, we have explored a number of options and continue to do so, particularly given the current position. We have had some modelling done, working in partnership with BIFA around what a service would cost, but we've checked and challenged that and tested that against other councils and what their services are going to cost as well. So we are satisfied that the cost that we are sharing with you is the true cost of delivering a food waste service. We have also modelled different numbers of rounds. We've looked at whether or not we could make do with fewer vehicles, fewer rounds, and what that would do to the costings. In terms of what we will do around contracts and procurement, I'm unable to answer the question tonight around what exactly are we going to do, because a lot of that will rest on the outcome of our conversations with government in terms of how much time have we then got. So we may deal with that by way of contract variation with our existing contractor, or we may deal with that through a separate process yet to be confirmed. So things have moved and changed so many times because of uncertainty around the settlement that's left us in the position. But I am confident, I think Dawn, we're confident that the costs that we're sharing with you are true costs, and they certainly are comparable when we look at what our wider waste service costs us to run as well.
So it would, the cost will go up with inflation as well. And with the, is it LGR, the transition? With the food waste again, would it be, how would the parishes be funding that? Because you wouldn't have the MBC funding that food waste programme. It would be down to villages as well, or is it just a separate thing?
Through you, Chair, if I may, just to clarify, it would the responsibility would transfer to the new principal authority, which would be the new unitary council. So it would transfer from us to the unitary. It wouldn't transfer from us to the parishes. It would be a retained function of the new council.
Councillor Thwaites.
So just going through the different figures, and sort of we'll start with the big ones. The big ones first. We talked about the food waste, but the other one was, and the one and don't recognise, and I'm pleased you saw it was a new one, because I thought I hadn't seen it or missed it or whatever. But the Lake Terrace flooding project, which is obviously a significant cost of 250,000, I think it was. Yeah. It's understanding where that is and where that's come from, and it's rather because we're just sort of accepting it straight into the budget without discussion, really, because I haven't seen it discussed anywhere else. Not that I'm involved in everything that's discussed, but it's to understand that
Yeah, happy to offer some insights, and then Lydia, if there's anything I missed that you want to add, please come in. So the Lake Terrace drainage project is not new. It's a very long-standing challenge in terms of the Lake Terrace site and the drainage of water from there. There are two elements to the programme overall. And this has been something that the council has been dealing with in various forms, I think, certainly since the start of the current waste contract. So one element of the project related to the pooling of water on the site, and that was considered a risk from the Environment Agency's perspective. That has been mitigated through the installation of some new drainage channels on site. However, those drainage channels had failed and need to be replaced. That's one part of a project which is not part of the 260,000. The much bigger project relates to a need to create quite a complex drainage system which goes under the Lake Terrace site and into the, I think, under the allotments adjacent. That has been designed through Lydia's team in partnership with, or in consultation with Severn Trent, who are a really key stakeholder in that, and that relates to the route and the way in which that water drains from the site, and that is to meet a regulatory requirement and to prevent any environmental issues from water from the site. That's probably the extent of my technical knowledge on that, but my reassurance to you is it's not new, but what we have now is the certainty around the design that's required, the technical colleagues that have been involved in that, and the ongoing dialogue with Severn Trent. The reason that we have included it in the budget as a must-have is it is a must-have. It really is a requirement that needs to take place, but of course it is at significant cost as well, which we recognise as a pressure on the budget. But I do want to reiterate this isn't new, but we do now have the detail that we've needed. I don't know if there's anything you want to add. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just for my knowledge, because so we're talking about the refuse site, which do we actually own them? Because obviously it's operated by county council.
It's our depot site from which our BIFA colleagues operate, so it is our site.
It's not just the waste site, or is it just the way it is the waste site?
No, there's a risk of getting confused with the household refuse site and the wider depot site. So it's the whole site, is it not? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, it was just a shame while they were building the housing estates around it and the flooding management, we didn't do something about it at that time, but that's hindsight. Thanks.
Lumley.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions, but I can always just cap it at 2 and then come back to the third one or something. Can you just go back to one of the slides where it was for like general maintenance for sites, NBC owned land, and there's just an allocation of about £30,000. Is that correct? Because I think that will just cover the actual country park car park on its own. Just go right back. It was just on its own, like a table with just one row, I think it was. Not like that, but a bit smaller. Don't worry. I just want to clarify. Yeah, that one. One forward, Adam. No, after that one. Yeah. Is that correct? That figure? Is that...
Yeah. So the planned maintenance various sites, that's the top up. We have a baseline budget in the, because it's special expenses, it's not general. So there's already a baseline budget in there, and that's the extra that's needed to do the essential works in 26-27.
Incidentally, just say that officers, it has been a very good presentation. Thank you as well. Just second question, just in terms of how much we spend, and we've just being careful. I noticed on one slide, it was I'm actually going to the HRA budget now. There's one bit that said that actually sort of like fire safety works are going to cost about £69,000 this coming financial year. I mean, is that a bit X amount too much? It seems a very large amount. Yeah. I've got, I mean, there's other bit.
Yeah. So if you members remember previously, around 4 or 5 years ago, we approved a much larger budget for fire safety work in our flats. It was over £1 million, and that was to address a lot of compartmentation issues and issues that came out of fire risk assessments. The majority of that work is now complete. We are in a position now where we've carried out a new round of fire risk assessments, which we have to do every 3 or 4 years. And those have identified further work that's needed. And that's why we carry out the assessments periodically. But in comparison to the original budget, it's a much smaller budget. So it's picking up a lot fewer issues than we did with the first round of fire risk assessments 4 years ago.
All right. If that's the case, I mean, it's one of those things you have to spend it. I'm just being careful, taxpayers' money. Just another thing as well. I can't remember what it was now. I've not written it down actually, but something. I'll come back to me, Chair. Sorry. Thank you.
Pritchett, you're indicating.
Are we going to go? Are we into discussion soon, or are we still doing clarification? I've got nothing to raise on the capital programme for this year. On the revenue budget, thinking my customer tonight is the cabinet and then the council. Picking up on the growth areas at a time of tightness, it's difficult circumstances. Appendix A in our papers, it has from the office as a statement of need, but we haven't got the full case of need, the calculations and the payback and the benefit here tonight to look at. I generally thought they were weak. The reasons for the expense. If I was on the cabinet, I'd certainly want more than that, and I'd also want to protect myself and put in this paper to the people like me at the council to look at. Two queries on it. There's £168,000, 190 towards the cattle market, stockyard development. Sorry, and some of that is marketing. So some of it will be managing the building, and some of it will be marketing. Yeah, I didn't see anything in the budget for next year. And will we be coming back for some more next year? Was a question on that. I found the farmers' health check very weak on that, and the point about the £74,000 for the Asfordby Road embankment is the forecast of what it's going to cost to fix it. If we're actually paying that amount of money out for baseline surveys, what's going to come out of that? But as I say, I didn't think that then. Some of my old demons are throughout the papers. The asset management programme reappearing over the last 5 years, still within the papers. But the main thing I took from all this was, and I'm pleased the chief executive mentioned a revision of the corporate plan, where the council started in 1974, the merger of the urban and rural district councils. We're not necessarily in Fergie's squeaky bum time, but we're down to McGovern time now, between now and the 1st of April 2028. Now, this is my view. The focus should be on being fit for purpose. And what the budget tells us, it tells us where we are and practically what we've been talking about, what we're going to do, what we need to do. And there's lots of things in progress. And it's a case of some things like the stockyard will naturally not have completed. But do we want, the Cabinet's got to decide whether it wants to carry on as we are or whether it wants to draw a line and say, these things need completing, and then working back with project plans to achieve that and make sure that we get fruit from things like the consultancy services that we're in place now. And then again, the scrutiny programme fitting in between redoing it. Where does the scrutiny go? So they would. I mean, I noted as well the HRA in its good position, and I thank you very much, Dawn, for your very clear presentation. So those are the three things that I would take out of it. And I mean, if you're presenting the growth monies to me now at the council meeting, I would have a little bit to say about them. Thank you.
And Councillor, I'm sure cabinet members present ears were wide open at that. I will say as an aside, as the Astorby Road embankment is in my ward and overlooks a number of properties rather menacingly, I can do nothing but support that particular proposal and the potential should works be needed. Are there any other questions members want to go on?
Chair, yeah, so just could just come back to me. So HRA budget overspend. Can I ask why all of the invoices that was said that had an actual backlog weren't paid on time? And is the actual amount that is overspending, is that due to come right down in the sort of in the years ahead? Thank you.
So if I can answer your second question, then I'm going to hand to Chris on the invoicing position. We would be I think naive to assume that costs are going to go down. Costs are going up. There are cost pressures. What we can give you in the for the future, though, is greater cost certainty, and that's something that the Cabinet have been really clear with us that they expect to see as we move into our new contracts, so we don't have the fluctuations that you've seen this year. So by moving to the schedule of rates model, that gives us greater cost certainty, and we shouldn't see those peaks and overspends that we've been seeing. The reality is, though, costs are getting higher, so we are not going to enter a new contract and be able to make a significant saving on those on the position, which was never our intention either. But what we cannot sustain is the inability to manage those spends and those the peaks and fluctuations that we've seen. So as soon as we've got further detail, we're still going through the process of finalising arrangements around new contracts. We'll be able to share those with members, and at every stage we will be checking the affordability of any arrangements that we implement. But for the reasons that I've outlined, there are pressures not just facing us, but are facing others too. If I can just hand to Chris, he'll be able to give a summary position of the invoicing situation. That's okay.
So the reference in the report, which I think you're referring to, is in 5.5.2. There were a number of invoices that were paid in this financial year that were for work completed in the last financial year. The calculations were carried out at the end of the year, and a sum of money was removed in error by which was human error, as it states in the report, rather than a failure of any system or our finance our processes that were followed. So the calculation was carried out, and that sum was removed by mistake.
Councillor Jubb.
Just one very quick question. Dawn, you mentioned, I think there were 67 councils that are hardest hit due to the changes in the calculation. Out of interest, are they predominantly rural?
There was quite a lot of rural, small districts in that grouping. It goes back almost to the business rates, and I think what Ed was saying, there were also a lot of councils in that grouping that, yes, have been hardest hit by the settlement on paper. And it comes back, it's quite complex, but it comes back to how pooling monies were distributed, and how I referred to the fact that the pool comes from the levies that you would have paid over. Some councils, very large councils that had an awful lot of growth, would have paid over potentially large amounts of levies. But actually, in terms of the local distribution, they weren't actually receiving that level because our local agreement in Leicestershire was a different allocation. We didn't all of us get back our actual levy. So the government assumed they were getting their levies back through the pooling mechanism when actually they weren't. So on paper, it looks like they were losing an awful lot of money, but the reality was it was money they never got in the first place because their local pooling arrangement was different and the government knows nothing about that. I hope that makes sense. So they might appear on paper to have lost a lot, but the reality was they were actually gaining. We were not in that position. So very difficult to know who out of that 67 were genuine losers.
I think, Chair, as well, if I may, it's one of the perverse outcomes of the settlement, actually, and something that Dawn and I focused quite a lot on with our conversations with MH2 CLG yesterday. Helpfully, they said they've heard this from a number of places because they can only distribute on what they see as the levy, the government. They don't have visibility of our local arrangements through the pool, and therefore they've made assumptions which are inaccurate in terms of what the local arrangements were. And you have got councils in Leicestershire who were predicting and projecting massive deficits in their MTFS. There's a consequence of the way the government has treated business rates, have now had a massive windfall in business rates and are now projecting a massive surplus. And the point we've made to government is the kind of massive inequality and impact that's having, where you've got some councils talking about spending sprees and us talking about, getting to vesting day with the lights still on. And that's an unacceptable position, frankly, for us and our residents, and I'm sure you as members. So that's the point we've made very forcibly and very clearly. It's obviously the point the leader made in his letter to the Secretary of State. And therefore, we hope there is some recognition of that. I think Dawn is right. We need to be modest in our expectations of what changes in the settlement, but it's at least they've acknowledged there's a challenge there and it is something they're looking at. So let's see what happens.
No, I've got a couple of things I wanted to raise, and in fact, Chief Exec, in answering one of the questions, touched on something I'd already made a note about, which is that everything seems, although it's not openly stated, it's quite clear that the whole settlement approach is geared towards LGR coming in on time, and therefore it carries some issues, but it's expected that will iron out throughout the LGR process. So on that specifically, we've got a 3-year settlement. And of course, those 3 years go past the potential vesting day for a new unitary authority. It doesn't seem logical to me that we then say, well, we'll wait until 2028 to look at the financing of this new unitary, whatever shape it is. I don't want to get into that debate here tonight. So is there any indication that once a decision is made, there is a process, because government are determining the funding for this new authority, but currently through all the separate ones that will make it up. Is there any indication that will be revisited?
Chair, what was said in the settlement was that for new authorities that do not have boundary changes, that they should take the guidance from basically adding together, amalgamating the settlements that are being given to those parts that would merge together. So yeah, that's the only guidance that we've got. And as I said before, that final year, the 29-30, the third 28-29, sorry, that's the one that we would have another spending review before, so that could change anyway as a result of that spending review.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for that clarification. It suggests a level of sophistication in their analysis of the needs of local areas that's up to the standard they've set in the settlement we've just received. But I won't say further on that. Just on one of the large items which you've set out as a potential spend is the transitional costs. Now again, because of the way LGR has been debated, in which 8 authorities have joined together to form a view, but then 2 others have gone their own separate way, which is Leicester City and Leicestershire County. There's been no dialogue, effectively, I assume, about transitional costs with those other higher tier authorities, the county and the city. But once we get a decision, the big money tickets. I mean, what's our 10 million a year here, 1.3 billion a year at the county. It's quite clear that 20 to 30 million you were talking about, Ed, should predominantly come from those higher tier authorities that form part of that process. Again, is it anticipated we'll get clarity later in the year when a decision has been made as to how that will be shared out? Because again, we could be squeezed unfairly over this, it seems to me, and the sooner we know, the better.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think my understanding is there's no set formula for how those transition costs are met. Just to give you an example from Cumbria, their costs, I believe, this is a few years ago now, were 18 million in terms of transition, 9 of which was met by the county council, and the other 9 was met by the district councils. There were 9, they all funded it by £1 million each. I would want to look at the relative size of those district councils to see if they were comparable in size, because clearly we are in spending power terms 4 times smaller than Charnwood. So generally I would advocate a more of a pro-ratering approach, and that's certainly where we will start in any discussions around that. But you're right, in terms of the principle, the expectation is that the upper tier authorities would bear the greatest financial load, and then there'll be a redistribution across the districts. Just to your point around conversations, I think 2025 on LGR was characterised by competition and bidding. Essentially, I would describe it, and what we did through in November. As chief execs, we very much recognise that we now need to move to a different mindset, because whatever the size and shape of local government, we as organisations are going to have to work together to deliver it in the best interests of our communities. And clearly, you'll recognise there's been a change in leadership at the county council, and we've had some early productive conversations with the new chief executive around this very topic, and around agreeing project and programme management structures that sit across all 10 councils that will be subject to this change. And that is absolutely the right approach, and something that we as districts fully support. So I'm hopeful and confident that we'll start to work collaboratively, informally initially, and that work is starting now. But then we will obviously have to formalise structures as we get into a decision in July, and then the structural changes order that will be laid in Parliament, we expect in September, will formalise and compel those structures to be established, and representation of various other functions that those structures will take in the intervening period before vesting day. I don't believe, as I say, that will mandate the split of costs, but there are some well-trodden routes that have been taken previously, which I would hope we would be able to mirror. Just in terms of our working assumption, and I suppose my working assumption at the moment, we've set aside through yourselves and ultimately the budget process 250,000 for this financial year. I would envisage having to, and our working assumption at the moment is we may have to set another £500,000 for the following year, or before vesting day. And so potentially you're talking about that being the kind of contribution that Melton Borough Council may have to meet. But that is just a working assumption and hasn't been tested through any discussion yet, Chair.
Thank you. More encouraging information to chew over. Are there any other comments that members of the committee wish to raise? Councillor Pritchett.
Hello, on the list I got here of growth money justification, the asset management plan, project prioritisation and management to the 31st of March 2028. I put town council, decision and funding for that. Yay, nay, what's going to happen? That's the fourth one on the list.
That's the Thwaites.
Thanks. I'm just going through some of the individual figures in there, and it's this one sort of broaches between the normal stuff and the HRA, because there's an amount down for garage improvements, which is 77k between 2026 and 2029. As we've already publicly announced that we're looking to dispose of a lot of those garages. Are those funds still valid within there?
So the strategy around garages that's set out in the housing asset management plan is that we retain garages that are in good condition and in high levels of areas of demand, and we dispose of the garages that are in poorer condition and low demand. So there are a number of garages which we intend to retain, but invest in proactively to ensure that they're suitable for reletting where we know that there's a demand for those garages.
Thanks. So they don't appear anywhere else, so that if we did benefit from whatever was done with the other garages, but that doesn't appear anywhere else as a benefit to the council by reusing them for some other purpose, which may be on the HRA or maybe the general account. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Sorry, just in terms of any income that comes from disposing of garages, that would become a capital receipt that would sit within the HRA and top that, yeah, but it would be specific to the HRA. It wouldn't support the general fund position.
And just one more follow on, it's from a comment that you made about voids being a problem in the fact that they're increasing, but surely that's something that's within our control. It's our management to reduce those voids, because yeah, the flats are going to come available, but it's how quickly we can actually turn them around and refill them. So that's the management of the void. So that's within that, should be within that control, shouldn't it?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. In terms of the void turnaround times, we are in control of that, and we should be minimising the amount of time it takes us to get a void from the tenant handing their keys back to us and the new tenant moving in. The increase that Michelle mentioned earlier is around the number of voids that we've received in a year. So that's the number of people choosing to leave their homes and move elsewhere. We do have a degree of control over that, in that we have early conversations with tenants to explore the reasons why they're looking to move, to see if there's anything that we can do to help them to sustain their current tenancy. But once a property becomes void, we have to go through the process of getting it ready for another tenant, and that's where the cost comes in. So that's the increase that we've seen is we would normally have 150 in a year. We've had 150 so far, and they all need investment prior to being relet.
Just on the voice, sorry, Chris. It just reminds me, I've made a little note here. So we've had an increase in the number of voids. Are the voids spread evenly across property types, or is there any particular sort of properties we've seen an uptick?
We do see a higher turnover of voids in certain areas. And we do tend to monitor trends so that we can see what's happening. I mean, some of the main reasons for seeing an increase this year do relate to things like the closure orders that carried out last summer. They all resulted in void properties becoming available and needing work. But we do monitor trends generally on voids to see where we have high level of demand, and see if we can do anything proactively in relation to that.
If I may add to that as well, so one of the cost pressures in relation to void that Chris will be fed up of me asking questions about is clearance costs. So we have experienced a particular demand around clearances from people who've left their property and left things within their property. Various things in place to mitigate that. Again, early conversations with tenants, a recharge policy that's been put in place, but always knowing that actually recouping monies incurred can be quite challenging in those circumstances. When I talked earlier on about the challenge of exclusion, so things that do not sit within the price per void design of the current contract, that's one of those elements, and so that has put particular pressure on the budget. So it's something that we are paying close attention to. It's something that has been built into the new contract as well, so we've got greater cost certainty around that element, and further work will be done with the teams to embed awareness amongst the teams and with tenants of the impact and implication of leaving things not cleared on departure from properties. So that is one of our challenges. The other thing that we will be doing is reaching out to councils across the country to see how others are managing that particular pressure. Another thing just to pick up, and it's not specific to council homes, we see this across the board, an increase in cases of hoarding and particular pressures in helping people with clearing properties. So there are a number of things that are impacting there, but that's certainly something that is jumping out in the figures and is causing us a challenge on voids.
Thank you. Are there any? Oh, Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years when there is a void and the people that were living there, obviously they've been evicted, and I do understand that you have to put the metal sheetings up to stop them from getting back in around the windows and what have you. But it seems as though these metal sheetings are up for such a long time, and as you go by, as months go by, you know, sometimes it's there. And now I know that the people that have been evicted, sometimes they do get, obviously, to get their own property out, and I know they come through the council and you help them to do that. But it just seems such a long time, and I was wondering, because is work still going on within the house, even though it's got the metal sheeting up, or, you know what I mean, or is it just left until the metal sheeting comes off and then you start doing the whatever it is you need to do within the house?
Okay, happy to respond to that, Councillor Gordon. So with a normal property turnover, you wouldn't see the metal sheeting as you describe it. Where you will have seen that is linked to our closure orders. And the reason we do that is to protect that property, so to prevent people from being able to access that. It is one of our more extreme ways of protecting a property, but it is necessary in those circumstances. So what you'll see is a closure notice is issued the day before the order goes to court. Once the order is in place, we will site X the property, which is the metal sheeting, and that would generally be in a place for a fixed period, which is usually 3 months initially, and often we will then apply for an extension of a further 3 months. In that time, we will not permit anybody to be in that property. Work is not ongoing in the property because that property still has a tenant allocated to it, and in order to retrieve the property into our possession, we still have to go to court in the way that any landlord would. So that is the reason that you will see those things in place for that period of time, and it is exceptions. You will have seen obviously a lot of activity last year in terms of closure orders linked to properties. Unfortunately, although positively taking action against county lines activity, which is where we decided we would take decisive action because we wanted to make a benefit for the community. There is a knock-on from doing that, one of which is the void cost, but we considered that was worth it and necessary in order to protect the community.
Yeah, thank you for that. You explained that really well. Thank you.
Are there any more comments or questions? If not, and I'll take up my other 17 items outside of the meeting. They're just, you know, minor observations and comments to pass on. I'd like to, on behalf of the committee, thank the officers for the presentation tonight and the very clear information they put to us. As there's no other urgent business, I will bring tonight's meeting to a close. Thank you.